I don't think many fully appreciate just how utilized the broker is. They were in many ways the entry point for these consumers to healthcare, key financial services, and unfortunately I just found that the tooling they were given, frankly, was not what we saw in some other parts of the system. And so you haven't seen as much of the kind of acquisition motion in the venture space that you might see in private equity.
And you chose to do this through an AI roll-up. Why not be on the other side of the spectrum and be pure AI, pure software company?
Great question.
I'm gonna pull up some of the stats here from the memo.
Look, to go acquire a company is not an easy thing. A lot of agency owners feel very, bruised and battered. This team is both technologically oriented, has a proven track record of growing businesses. We had a partner of ours also say I could never have survived Q4 without Gyde, which is exactly what we want to be hearing.
Where does Gyde go from here? What does it take to get there? Hi everyone, I'm Brenton Fargnoli, a partner at Lightspeed Venture Partners, and this is the Investment Memo, the show where founders reveal the stories behind their multi-million-dollar deals. Today I'm joined by Will Johnson, the co-founder and CEO of Gyde, the platform transforming how people navigate healthcare. In a system that's notoriously confusing, Gyde is building the layer that simplifies the entire experience, from benefits to financial decisions to accessing care. Today we're hearing from Will on the insight that sparked Gyde, the three vectors that make health insurance brokerage an optimal AI roll-up market, and what makes Will a Hall of Fame Oscar alumnus. Will, welcome to the show.
Brent, thanks for having me.
Congratulations, Will. Gyde just launched with around $60 million in funding. Phenomenal feat. I think we're going to have some fun today. The format's a little bit different, where we're going to really take a peek behind the investment decision behind funding Gyde and what Gyde's really all about. And so in order to do that, we're going to share with you something founders rarely get to see, you certainly haven't seen, which is the actual internal investment memo. Now, we did the seed and the Series A, and so here you get a 2-for-1. We're going to share with you here the seed memo with the Series A memo. First, I want to really dive into and get your reactions to the three core pieces here, which are, first off, why healthcare insurance brokerage is an optimal AI roll-up market, why you have exceptional founder market fit. That should be a fun conversation. And 3, the outsized return potential that Gyde has to scale in the space.
Totally. So maybe we can start with the first one, which is why this is a good market to begin with. Well, I think there's two functions, and maybe we can start with just some background around why we started Gyde to begin with. And in many ways, I was an Oscar for 10 years, and I was spending a good chunk of my time in the brokerage market to varying degrees, whether it was launching markets, helping to mature those as we thought about, growing markets, particularly in the Southeast and Southwest, whether that be Texas, Florida, Georgia. And the thing that I saw was the brokerage was really the most important kind of stakeholder or entity in that value chain, but was also the most underappreciated. They were in many ways the entry point for these consumers to healthcare, key financial services, etc. And unfortunately, I just found that the tooling they were given, frankly, was not what we saw in some other parts of the system. And so for years, I was kind of stuck on that. And I looked at, a number of different models to ultimately go attack this problem, which is really empowering the broker to be an even more prominent kind of supported guide through a member, whether that be from an employer or via employee or a consumer's life. Once we started to see, the advent of AI and frankly, the transformational potential of the technology, I got increasingly convicted that, partnering and building with owners within these markets, some of which, we knew to varying degrees in the early days could be potential partners for us, was the best mechanism for us to go to market. And so the market remained pretty fragmented. We saw lots of private equity success previously in the space. And we believed if we combined what we would call, kind of a venture-esque technology and AI-centric engineering organization with a motion that had seemed to work in kind of other parts of the investment world, the private equity side, the combination of those two things could give us an interesting profile of, private equity-like return plus some venture upside, which we thought was really attractive. The more we started talking to folks in the market, the higher our conviction was that this was the right approach, particularly because the key challenges we were solving for felt like great and almost tailor-made use cases for AI support, and certainly not in the vein of replacing the broker, but in augmenting them, and ultimately making these entities that we believe are the most valuable entities in the value chain more prominent, supported largely with technology.
Fantastic. Maybe taking a step back, in terms of the role of the broker, right? I think for many viewers, the broker is a new concept, right? And so in order to talk about the significance of Gyde in the world, I want to really make sure we explain that piece. And so my understanding is four pillars to the patients first, providers, payers or carriers or health plans, and then this broker, which is really the focus of your work. We have here in the memo description of the role of insurance brokerage covers policy selection, enrollment, and support, and are responsible for the vast majority of U.S. health insurance distribution. For our viewers who aren't as familiar with the healthcare industry, what's the role of the broker in the healthcare system today?
Yeah, and so I think the first point is a good one that you brought up, which is the vast majority of insurance enrollments in this country are done through a broker. Now, many of us get that coverage through, our employers, but there's also a large fraction of the country that is consumer-driven in nature, whether that be, Medicare Advantage, the individual market, et cetera, which also largely use brokers to enroll. And so in many ways, they're kind of a key access point and source of guidance for these consumers and employers to ultimately navigate coverage decisions and get whether that's themselves and their families or their employees into the right coverage construct to ultimately manage their health and the rest of their kind of financial life outside of just the core health insurance vertical. Generally, what we see from the best agencies out there is they are providing kind of four core services. They are sourcing, of course, new potential consumers. They're enrolling those consumers. They're servicing those and then ultimately renewing them. What I think is often forgot is within this bucket of service, they're oftentimes the member's first call. And so one of the things we saw at Oscar quite viscerally, and it's been sort of hilarious the deeper we've gotten into the space here with Gyde to talk to some of our friends about, the role of the broker and how I think this is oftentimes not just misunderstood, but not even understood at all. Like most folks don't realize the role the broker plays because they're typically, interacting with their HR manager if they're through an employer. But in the consumer world, oftentimes the broker is taking the first call from all of these consumers, members, and employer, groups, et cetera. And as a part of that, they're the first line of defense. So when we were at Oscar, oftentimes these members, as great as Oscar's digital experience was still calling their broker first. So the real question became for us, how do we get more leverage out of this infrastructure that is both essential and critical to these communities, but has been frankly kind of underinvested in?
Yeah, and I want to double click into that because it's fascinating. As we mentioned, the broker is the majority of insurance distribution. The vast majority is going through the broker. You said the broker is often the first call. Um, why is this such an underinvested in piece of the value chain here?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a couple reasons. I think one, I don't think many fully appreciate just how utilized the broker is for things outside of enrollment and renewal. I think most individuals just like, oh, hey, you go to your broker, enroll, and that's it. But if you go into a broker's office, what you often find is Post-it notes all over the wall, spreadsheets that they're using to manually enroll and service folks, and teams that are trying desperately to do a good job for these clients and on behalf of these clients. And so I think on one hand, folks just haven't fully appreciated what I'd call the actual day-to-day of these entities. And then two, I think that you haven't seen as much of the kind of acquisition motion in the venture space that you might see in private equity. Because when I go talk to my friends in private equity, they go, oh, insurance brokerage, great space. My friends in venture are like, what do you mean? There's a few out there, but like we're doing things on the clinical side. And so I think what we saw as a key insight was you can certainly create a similar like private equity motion where you're partnering through kind of acquisition. And we think we're doing that a different way, which we can talk about in a second. But if you view the broker as really this entry point to a larger subset of services, products, and even experiences for these members, the business model starts to look very different than it might have historically looked when, folks might have just looked at this as, hey, these folks are just enrolling consumers or employers in coverage. We think they're doing much more than that. We're going to empower it.
Fantastic. Well, since it's so underinvested in building technology for it, let's start talking about some of the product pieces. In the memo, we reference here that the current paradigm for health insurance brokerage is one of manual, repetitive tasks relying on unstructured data. The SMBs that service this market are true mom and pops that are limited to traditional services operations. Gyde seeks to infuse AI through a roll-up strategy, not only to reduce costs, but importantly, scale revenue. What are you seeing in the healthcare experience? What major insight led you to Gyde here?
Well, a couple of things. I think one, similar to what I was articulating earlier, I saw that the brokers were communicating with their members a lot. Like they were dealing with a lot of questions. And I thought that engagement was quite interesting. These members were quite sticky. they might have moved health insurance carriers every year, right? When I was at Oscar in the individual market, we were seeing a lot of liquidity in that space. You're seeing now more of that Medicare Advantage and even group with the advent of ICHRA, more level funding and other solutions. And so what I found interesting was that the carriers were becoming more of this kind of liquid commodity, so to speak, that you were moving between, but they didn't leave their broker. And if anything, the more liquid these markets became, the more important the broker became. But I didn't necessarily see kind of investment scaling with that importance. And particularly as you could think about the expansion of the scope of services an individual broker could provide with AI augmenting them, seemed to be something that folks were maybe not missing, but just neglecting. We thought that this is the single best approach to take if we wanted to build not only a category defining business, but one that could really transform the experience for millions of Americans across the country.
Fantastic. And you chose to do this through an AI roll-up strategy. I think this is a newer concept, a newer strategy. There's a lot of interest and curiosity in it. Could you describe a little bit about AI roll-ups and kind of what that means to you and to this brokerage space?
Totally. Yeah. So, I mean, I think the AI roll-up can be simplified as partnering through ownership. And, I can talk about kind of the Gyde flavor of this. And then really leveraging technology as the true alpha driver for the business. We saw it in a very similar vein. I think what was interesting about the brokerage space is it had been transacted quite significantly and yet still fragmented. So you had lots of successes via, those acquiring agencies. And yet the market was still quite fragmented and what we thought was kind of ripe for another of these, but with a different flavor. And so when we had kind of gone and done our diligence about the space, we had talked to maybe 100 agency owners that had sold their companies. Honestly, Brenton, I still am yet to find one that was super excited, with their prior buyer. And, obviously not naming names.
That's might be polite, not super excited.
Not super excited. We're here to talk about Gyde. But, I think the way that we viewed it is, what if we took a really owner-centric approach to this kind of whole category? And so the way that we talk about it internally is a partner and build. And so if we are owner-centric, revenue-focused, we think that the model can look quite different, particularly if it is technology-led as opposed to leverage or kind of arbitrage led. All of those are things that, of course, we'll be beneficiaries of from a model perspective. But if the business is largely built on, an AI platform that we ultimately distribute to our partner agency owners, keep those teams in seat, and then dedicate real resources to them to help them grow and ultimately improve the lives for themselves, sure, their families, of course, but also the communities in which they serve, we think that we'll build just a differentiated platform. And ultimately, that's going to be one that allows us to counterposition against some of the stuff that's in the market today. We've seen that early. I was reading this very quickly, and I'm happy to say that we've exceeded some of the numbers in here already, which is nice. That's usually what we want to see after a few months. But I do think the thing that's driven a lot of, kind of gravitational force and receptivity to Gyde is this notion of being a little bit different and actually bringing true resources to, a part of the market that has either been neglected or purchased and then, frankly, kind of mistreated. And we plan to do it differently.
Yeah. And I get you don't want to be a traditional acquirer. Why not be on the other side of the spectrum and be pure AI, pure software company?
Great question. We looked at software businesses. My view is that full economic alignment is the single best way to both capture and deliver value with this new paradigm shift. And one of the things I saw even in my past life is that oftentimes folks wanted technology, sure, but really hands-on support. And if we're able to bring both, right, a market-leading platform built by, engineers from places like Stripe, Oscar, Ramp, etc., and true resources that work with these folks hand in hand on the ground to help implement the technology into these environments, we think that our results will be, frankly, much better than if it was just a software product alone. And so I think that economic alignment, particularly with these owners and their teams, is what is a real differentiator for us. It even got me more philosophically excited about the business. Like I said, I kind of owe my career to this part of the market. And I think building with these partners, through these relationships and the way we've constructed them is really exciting.
Yeah. I think we've described as really a sweet spot between M&A acquisition, technology, and AI. And I think you'll find this in the memo as we describe our concept of an AI roll-up market. We mention, AI roll-ups where there's a high amount of fragmentation, creating ample supply for acquisition, and what we call large, sleepy incumbents. Yep. Who are not leaning in, trailblazing with AI, and the two of those coming together to be both an early venture platform as well as acquiring companies with transformation at scale.
100%. Yeah, we feel the same. And I think, for us, we've got a deep respect for the competitors that are in the space today. They've gotten very large for a reason. And so I think in many respects, we've got to look at them and, like I said, have a healthy respect for what they've been able to accomplish, while also being cognizant that, Gyde's going to go do it differently, and look forward to partnering with the right agency owners to ultimately advance our mission and, build the next generation platform.
Fantastic. On the acquisition side, I know we talk a lot about technology, and on the venture side, we're obviously very excited about that piece.
Yeah.
But there's a real math and science to the acquisition side of it. And so how do you build that repeatable machine and muscle and infrastructure?
Yeah. So, I think the benefits of the roll-up is that you are acquiring cash flow. And I think there's a lot of P&L benefit to that, which gets folks really excited. I think the thing you have to be very good at quickly is laying down a lot of functions with operational and process rigor almost on day one. And so, look, to go acquire a company is not an easy thing. I think on a human level, my grandparents were small business owners for decades. And so I had a very visceral understanding of, how attached and how real these businesses are for many of these owners, on an emotional and human level. And so step one is just saying, hey, look, are you in a position to have the right degree of empathy and mission orientation for an owner to give you the responsibility of owning the business? And I would look at it as such. It's not something where you just acquire it. It is in many ways great responsibility to acquire somebody's company that they've spent oftentimes
Their baby.
building. It's their baby.
Yeah.
It's many times multi-generational.
Mm-hmm.
So step one is really looking yourself in the face and saying, hey, are you ready for that responsibility? And then step two is saying, do we have all of the infrastructure to do it, right? You've got to go source those partners. Ultimately, you've got to work through what a appropriate deal construct is, such that they feel like they have a good deal, and so do you. Aligning incentive post-acquisition, you've then got to close. You've got to have lots of infrastructure around that. Quality of earnings firms, outside counsel, some of those resources internal, again, some of that external. You got to go lay all that down very quickly. And then for us, you've both got to have a world-class technology team that's delivering value to these partners. That's part of the reason why they're picking us. And a value creation infrastructure that supports these businesses post-close. Because one of the things that you hear from these owners is, oh, I got bought by the big platform, and then 2 weeks after the check hits, I kind of don't hear from them except for the monthly, can you send me your performance report email I get? We're not doing it that way, right? So you've got to have all that infrastructure very quickly. For us, that was less than 6 months. We wanted it in 3 to be ready to go, such that when we did our first deals, which, we'll close here, 2 of them in Q1, we're not figuring that one out. Like, it's ready to go and this is the plan. And I think just being buttoned up helps there.
No, for sure. And I've spoken with some of the owners that we're partnering with here, and it feels like there's a tangible sense of difference, that there's something new here with Gyde. What would you distill that down to compared to the legacy players in the space?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think some of the early quotes from the initial kind of sourcing and M&A process were amazing to hear, because in many ways it's almost music to our ears. One of them said, this just feels different. This team is both technologically oriented, has a proven track record of growing businesses, and is building the next generation platform. We had a partner of ours also say, I could never have survived Q4 without Gyde, which is exactly what we want to be hearing from a technical perspective. And so I think on both a human strategy and technical level, we had a lot of receptivity from those folks. And I think what was even more exciting was that many of them have other offers or had talks with other large brokerages. And, I think this notion of these guys just feel different is something that we're super excited about. And largely, I think, proves the thesis in these initial innings that what we're bringing to market is a differentiated model.
Yeah, well, these guys feel different is a great place to transition to the next topic, which is the team. Obviously, in venture, first and foremost, we're backing the team and you as a founder. And we do great diligence on understanding that. You and I have known each other for a few years now, and so I'm really grateful we finally got to formally work together. But in really doing our diligence, we made a lot of phone calls, and not the references you gave, but the folks we know and trust who have worked with you over your decade at Oscar. And so most folks don't get to see the memos. They certainly don't get to see the back channel references. Oh, no names attributed, so anonymity, but you're gonna see here exactly why we feel you're a fantastic fit for this business, and I show that exceptional founder market fit. So from the memo, we have high quality experience scaling Series B startup to post IPO in a relevant domain to his next venture. Additionally, Oscar alums have proven to be one of the top health tech mafias, which myself coming from the Flatiron Health Mafia, we don't say lightly. On the references, we've got some quotes here. Rock star, stud, a guy you don't bet against, to list just a few. Will has driven universal followership previously and exhibits characteristics of a founder who will continue to be able to do so. He's a deep domain expert in the space, quote, his backyard, an action-oriented yet thoughtful operator, strong communicator with tons of energy, and generally a smart, hardworking, highly motivated, good person. He was comped to Hall of Fame Oscar alumni. How do you react to that?
Deeply humbling. I mean, I think if we just look at my initial launch team at Oscar, even that roster alone was incredible. Just the folks who are in our orbit, the Jay Kedar, Bobby Gulich, Mike Kopko, who very much has been a great advisor and partner for us for years. And of course you guys. So just that initial team has, a Hall of Fame roster to begin with. So to be included, I think, is deeply humbling. And two, I think in many ways, it just reinforces the talent bar that you need to instill early in these organizations to make them successful. I think one of the things that separated Oscar for as long as it did was just the quality of its people. And, to be in a class where you even get kind of the mafia title says a lot, I think particularly about what Mario and Josh assembled in those early days. And we've taken some of those same principles here. I mean, I think if you look around the table, there's, of course, a lot of folks that have had Oscar in their CV. There's a lot of folks with Stripe in their CV. And I think that's done with intentionality because we want those that have come from high talent density organizations because that's the one we're building.
Yeah.
And we're exceptionally intentional about it. I mean, one of the things I talk about all the time is being a ridiculously good gatekeeper. You have to treat these things as if they are, a baby for us, and you've got to raise them as such. So I think, just being a part of that early cohort, and obviously their favorable words mean a ton, but just reinforce the power of talent. And we've certainly tried to borrow from some of that at Gyde.
And it seems clearly Oscar recruited exceptionally talented people, but then something happened along the way as well. What lessons did you take from that, and what are you bringing to building that team over time at Gyde?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's a couple of things. One is you kind of increase your scope and responsibilities. You just see a lot of stuff across the value chain within healthcare. And it also reinforces you need a lot of different skill sets and perspectives in the room. And so, I think what's been great about our initial, launch at Gyde is Sam and I worked together for 6 years at the jump. And so your co-founder relationship is oftentimes one of the most sacred parts of these journeys in addition to your investors. And so Sam and I had always worked exceptionally well together and bring kind of two different lenses, which I think complements us well and ultimately builds a team that's fairly well rounded. And so if you look at who we've put around the table, you've got folks even on the engineering side with like deep data and, gnarly data wrangling expertise. You've got those with digital member experience expertise on the team. We have those that have come from the brokerage world, those that have come from private equity. And so the thing that I saw at Oscar that they did really well is pulled folks from different backgrounds, sometimes not even in healthcare, and put them into the same room to ultimately achieve what, I still think is an incredible feat. And so I think as I kind of grew in my career at Oscar, saw various parts of the company, whether it was, the technology side of the business, of course, launching markets, leading some of the ICRA growth efforts, all of those experiences reinforce this notion of having a, high caliber, diverse, and also high energy squad assembled. And that's kind of what we've done here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you call it Sam, your co-founder, the early hires on the team. Let's dig into that team you've assembled a little bit more. From the memo, we have co-founder Sam is ex-Oscar and most recently growth leader at Series B health insurance brokerage FMO startup serving 3,500 health insurance brokers. Trusted ex-founder, ex-Oscar founder back channels described him as a sales superstar and desirable talent they themselves tried to hire. So good on you getting to partner with him. Sam, as you mentioned, worked closely with Will at Oscar. And the more broad team beyond you and Sam, Will has surrounded himself with the A team. From all early signals, we remain impressed by his leadership and ability to drive followership. Both items he referenced well around. He has also shown poise and maturity in making tough decisions to not hire folks just for the sake of filling open job requirements, and been extremely resourceful in getting to the right hard-to-reach N of 1 people. I've been super impressed, whether it's a key advisor, a key broker in the space, a key AI talent. You somehow identify them, find them, and then convince them to join the journey. how are you convincing folks to join this space that has been underinvested in? People don't fully understand the role of the broker. How are you creating that that team?
So I think there's two elements of it. I think one, the mission is really important to folks across the healthcare ether because the more time they spent in the space, I think the more they've appreciated, oh, like this is actually a part of the ecosystem that really can and should be empowered and invested in and is supported. And so I think the notion of being the entry point and supporting that entry point gets a lot of individuals that come from the healthcare space really excited. I think for those that either come from the space or don't, this whole notion of partnering through acquisition and building products to what I would call empower, support, and augment the communities that many of these folks either grew up in, have come from. And as an example, our founding engineers in Miami, there's, potential that we might have a couple businesses down there. We'll see. And so I think there's a higher calling for some of our early talent around, supporting the economies of these local communities and doing so in a way where you're bringing world-class AI technology into these environments that might struggle otherwise to implement it. And so, yes, you get these great captive environments for you to build product. You can create these frontier AI products across voice, chat, workflow automation, etc. But you get to do so in a way that is very much partner-centric and oriented in nature and for the community, with the mission being this kind of like key foundational pillar for us. I think the combination of those are really exciting. And then I think the third is the commercial opportunity is quite significant. And, I think when you add kind of those three pieces together, right? High mission orientation, the ability to solve very interesting technical challenges that are community oriented in nature, and the opportunity that I believe we have to create not only a category defining business, but one that is fairly commercially unprecedented. It's tough to at least not take a look at it. I was joking with you earlier today that, when I was first kind of ideating what has now become Gyde, I was, working with an engineer that at the time was like, oh, I'm head of eng at this other startup, I'm just going to keep doing this now. I said, okay, that's fine. I'll call you in 3 months. Well, of course, he started in December. So it's always nice to get those folks back on board, which I think has been the most exciting part of this, is just seeing the talent we've been able to ultimately pull into the business. And much like I've said in different forums, on a personal level, I feel fiduciary to our owners, our investors, and our employees. And so for everybody willing to give us a shot, we're certainly going to give them every ounce of what we got.
Oh, fantastic. And I'd love to double click into two pieces you mentioned, the mission and the commercial opportunity. First, on the mission, at face value, it's, brokerages, selling insurance, but there's more here on the health journey. And frankly, as a physician, it got me very excited. And I'd love you to share a little bit more about that. Call it Act 2, if you will.
Totally. I mean, I think one of the key insights that I saw at Oscar was the broker as this first line of defense and the member's first call was not just enrolling these consumers, but if you think about all of the touch points that a broker has or, data inputs that they have from these consumers around issues that are going on, whether that be clinical, financial, living situation, etc., it got me increasingly excited about being a true navigational force for these populations and even a deeper, more integrated partner, with payers. And so I think as we continue to go down this journey, as we build products for the brokerage, I would think about it even more so as building products for the entry point to the system and creating a more longitudinally supportive vehicle for consumers, employers, employees as they navigate what is an increasingly complicated healthcare journey annually. So I think for us, what I'd call empowering that service element, empowering those things beyond just enrollment is really exciting, whether that be renewal, finding other products and services, all of those kind of key elements of where you could take the business get us deeply excited. And I think we're bringing some partners, around the table that are equally excited about that as well as part of the financing.
And I guess that might be in part where the name comes from.
Possibly so. Possibly so. We debated the name a lot, but ultimately we landed on Gyde very bluntly because it is the core function of the business. And, I think that we've kind of discussed what the name could or should be, and we kind of kept coming back to this whole notion of a singular guide for all insurance, wealth, and health needs. And as we think about even where the company is going from a product and commercial perspective, that's always been the key kind of guiding light, mission, and ultimately what we're delivering on, for the partners that we have today.
Yeah, patients sure need a guide with the insurance black box.
That's right.
The other point you mentioned was commercial opportunity. So I'm going to pull up some of the stats here from the memo. The health insurance market is $1.5 trillion with a T. Roughly 70% of insured population are in private health insurance policies. And these are distributed primarily, we can call it 3/4, through brokers. Additionally, brokers represent a large labor pool with well north of 400,000 brokers in the country and over 100,000 vending health and life insurance related products. There are several publicly traded multi-product beyond health insurance brokerages like Aon, Marsh McLellan, which have leveraged acquisition strategies to turbocharge their growth. So the market's obviously very large. How are you thinking about the competitive landscape in this space?
Yeah. So, I mean, to your point, it's a large market with multiple winners, which we actually thought was pretty exciting for us because it wasn't necessarily winner take all. You saw multiple large-scale publicly traded brokerages, a large number of privately traded brokerages that are quite large as well, of which we discussed across different product lines, right? So it's not just limited to one product line. And so for us, what got us most excited was the fact that the market was really large and there was room for multiple $10 billion, if not $50 billion plus players. Like those were all very evident. I thought the other component that seemed really exciting to us was the natural opportunity to expand services that the traditional brokerage offered quickly through AI led us to think that that on a TAM basis, we were looking at healthcare initially, but the TAM, if you look at even the broader market, whether that be insurance, wealth services, is enormous. And so we think as you kind of project out 10 years, the health insurance market is certainly our wedge. And, starting with, individual Medicare Advantage and employee benefits. But if you think about these kind of Act 2, Act 3, parts of the company, it's really just expanding the TAM meaningfully as you think about expansion of insurance, wealth services, cracking this health nut, et cetera, led us to believe not only is your kind of day one market pretty sizable, but if you think about the Act 2s and the Act 3s, it led us to believe, again, on the commercial basis, you've got a lot in front of you if you want to go tackle it.
Yeah, absolutely. $1.5 trillion health insurance market, not big
It's
enough.
big
You've got additional sights in your eyes here. On the AI topic, obviously everyone's thinking about it, different strategies, buy, partner, build. The existing brokerages in the space at scale, why can't they infuse AI?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple things. One, AI tooling will be available to many, right? Like it exists today. You can, use it if you're even, a Salesforce user, as an example. I think what's going to separate Gyde is twofold. One is the team. Very bluntly, I just don't think that anyone's going to assemble the talent-dense culture and kind of team dynamics that we will. And we're already seeing the fruits of those labors even early. The second, though, is I think the way in which we're going to market with this kind of partner and build approach with like highly aligned incentives between the two of us allows for a differentiated implementation and utilization of that technology that I think will be tough for others to implement in the same fashion. And so when we can come in and do this hand in hand with these partners, it allows us not only to understand the nuances of their business and make sure that we're appropriately capturing those in our product and our application rollouts, but two, it allows the owners to have an embedded resource to say, hey, I have a question about what to be doing here, and we are hand in hand with them through that entire journey. It doesn't quite exist, in some of the other processes. I think this whole notion of forward deployed engineering has become increasingly in vogue, and I think this is a large driver of it. Deployment strategists has become an increasingly large kind of like part of the labor market because of this as well. And I think for us, in many respects, our entire value creation function is forward deployed. And so I think that element is going to be quite impactful for the owners, and we're ultimately going to see, I think, the returns both from a experience perspective for the clients and an economic perspective for those that are owning these companies.
Yeah, I think everyone gets conceptually AI can make things more efficient, more abundant. Can you give us a tactical example or two,
For sure.
and maybe how this impacts the user, our viewers who would be using, technology to get health insurance brokered for them?
Totally. And I mean, I think if we just think about what Q4 we just got through, and we're talking to a lot of agency owners right now who feel very bruised and battered, and it's very difficult for these folks that have worked hard to scale their businesses. There's these agencies, and in some ways it's almost like their reward for all of their success in scaling these companies is a ridiculous administrative and service burden, particularly in Q4 when you've got a large renewal cycle. And so
That's
for
right.
us
So this all happens during one quarter of the year.
exactly. For the most part, you see the majority of enrollment happen during Q4. Another conversation about if we should just move to birthdays or
Like an
something.
accountant during tax season.
It's the exact corollary. And so for us to be able to come in and say, hey, can we work with you to help to automate some of those renewal workflows and just take some fraction of that off your plate that are high frequency but low complexity tasks that allow the broker to have deeper, more meaningful human conversations goes a long way for these partners. And so, I cited this quote earlier, but the quote that we had that was basically like, I couldn't have survived Q4 without Gyde is kind of all we needed to hear to reinforce some of the workflow automation that we're delivering, even in these initial innings for just something like renewal, is already adding value to these broker partners. And so I think that's like but one very simple example of something you can do to unlock a lot of value. And there's a truckload of other examples
I
as
think
well.
it's clear you ease the administrative burden during this sprint or this crunch for the broker.
Totally.
How about on the client or patient side, right? They're having AI interact with them or a broker enabled by AI. What's the response been like, and how do you foresee that evolving?
It's been fantastic. And that I think has been the thing that's been most reassuring for us is that we've both seen a lot of engagement with the AI tech that we've rolled out. And even in the early innings, we've seen very strong engagement, across various consumer cohorts as well. It's not isolated to just one part of the country, population, language, even age. In many ways, we're actually seeing pretty consistent performance across all of those dimensions when you think about the cohorting. I think in many respects, consumers need to be warmed up to the AI technology to use to begin with. I think some are going to embrace initially and be an early adopter. I think some will be a little bit more skeptical. And so for us, it just means you need a programmatic and thoughtful playbook to introduce any of the applications that you're rolling out to these consumer profiles or these employers' employees with a degree of kind of tact and thoughtfulness that you'd see in other kind of software businesses as well. And it's not like you can just lob some of these AI products out into the ether and consumers will just use them and it'll be fine. You need to do it in a thoughtful, kind of very caring way and realize that what we're using AI for is oftentimes some of the most important decisions in these consumers and employers' lives. And so you both have to understand that responsibility and treat that whole construct with the empathy required to ultimately drive engagement, but perhaps of equal, if not more importance, utilization, right? So if we look at even some of the richness of conversations we're seeing come through early, the only way you get that degree of kind of depth in those conversations is by building trust very early and leading with empathy. These consumers go through a very difficult Q4 as well. It's difficult for the broker, it's difficult for the consumer. It's not fun getting a bill that says your rate's going up 28% year over year. So you got to be thoughtful about how you show up.
Yeah, absolutely. Have there been surprises in terms of reactions to the technology, and maybe after that, surprises to you as a first-time founder after, I don't know, a decade at one company?
I think the whole journey is full of surprises. I think as we're both new fathers, which is great, and I think in some ways surprise has now just become part of the DNA. And so maybe I'm just numb to it. I joke all the time that having a child actually makes you a much better founder. It helps to keep you very balanced and prioritizing the right things. I think the thing that's been perhaps not surprising, but the most exciting is, again, the team we've assembled and this, what I call kind of gravitational pull that we're feeling from the market to Gyde and what we're doing. And so I think, while we're never surprised, I think those are things that we would view as earned but expected. It has been reassuring to see some of those expectations prove out to be true in these initial innings. And, we've now got a lot of work to do to continue to prove out the rest of this memo, which is the most
Absolutely.
exciting.
Let's get to what was behind this memo, which was during the fundraise process, right? I recall we've known each other again a few years now,
Yeah.
but things were, started talking every day, increasingly getting excited about this unique opportunity and time and team. And I recall there's one week we wanted to really dive deep together. He said, I'm on the road, my wife, family in Little Rock, and then I'm going to a broker conference in Indianapolis. And I said, all right, let's get dinner. Let's get dinner in Indianapolis. So
Incredible.
we flew out and it was a great dinner. And for me, that really solidified that this was the opportunity and time to innovate in this space. And you really demonstrated a clarity of vision, I felt, throughout all of that. And I know we've known each other for some time, but I got to learn a little bit more about your baseball days.
Yeah.
And whether it's seeing the pitcher's ball or kind of seeing this moment, I think got us all very excited of the vision that you have ahead of you. Curious on your end, you chose to work with Lightspeed at the seed, and then again to lead the Series A. What was going through your mind?
Yeah. So, I guess I'll point to a couple key drivers for you guys. I think one, you have to give a lot of credit to Lightspeed, you and the team, just how you showed up in terms of flying into Indianapolis, Obviously bringing multiple stakeholders. Isaac, of course, now joining the board as a part of this round, so it's nice to have those folks around the table. I think too that the combination of what I call your early stage kind of healthcare expertise in combination with what Lightspeed was bringing between Isaac and Amish on, the more M&A growth equity side of the business got us really excited about you all as a partner, not just from a capital perspective, but from an expertise perspective. Then I think too, you got to give a lot of credit to Robbie and the call we had, together. And his whole high conviction, high concentration approach to me really resonated. In some ways, stylistically, that's who we are at Gyde as people. And I think that really did ring true as we talked about kind of how you all have been as a partner through the seed process, sure, but even into the Series A and beyond. And so I think those two factors were hugely important for us. And then very bluntly, you referenced incredibly well as well. I don't have the investment memo on Brenton, but if we reverse course a bit, I think you've got to give a lot of, credit to you individually for being a great partner to other, Oscar founders. And I'm doing the same calls you guys are, you know how this is. And, the feedback came back similarly glowingly positive. So if you think about those three kind of, expertise, high conviction, high concentration for a business that is a little bit more capital intensive, and just your direct partner, all three of those are really important. And, it's tough to score better than you guys did across those three dimensions.
That's fantastic to hear. And we're so grateful for the partnership and trust, and we're working every day to continue to earn that, Will. What does this $60 million enable you to do?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. One, it's accelerating our product roadmap. I think we've got a big AI platform vision, some of which we were talking about even this morning, and we're excited to accelerate that. The second, though, is to continue to find great owners that are both mission-oriented in the same vein as we are and also highly growth-oriented, right? So we're talking to lots of owners right now about M&A opportunities. This is a big part of the kind of M&A cycle is this January through September kind of part of the year. And so the dollars also help us acquire more of those partners that have given us the opportunity to work with them. And the third is get key leadership into the business. We just hired, our head of M&A in Frederick, which is an incredible hire. We're going to add more technical leadership as we think about what we're doing for Q1 and Q2. And so if you think about it as kind of team, product, and partners is the way we would view it, this 60 helps us across all of those dimensions. And then, for us, we think that puts us in an incredible spot for 2027 and, view Lightspeed as a long-term partner as a part of that journey.
Looking ahead, where does Gyde go from here? What does it take to get there?
Yeah, so I think for us, we're staying hyper-focused on both our current kind of one-year plan and then what our broad kind of forward-looking multi-year strategy looks like. As a part of the one-year plan for us, it's largely bucketed into three categories, but with a real focus on one, truly building a differentiated AI platform for these agency owners. Part of the promise from me to them is that we will devote real resources and bring best-in-class talent to them as a part of the relationship with Gyde. So that's a big focus. The second, though, is much like I said earlier, finding more of them, right? Finding more of those partners and bringing them into this platform that we think is not just differentiated, but what we think is category defining. And then I think third, on a more visionary basis, where do we take the company over the next decade? Right? What is Gyde's going to be impact on the world? And I think, we've now got the right combination of people around the table to help us, think through what those Act 2 and Act 3 more tactical plans look like. And that's a big part of what we're going to be working on in the background during the course of the next 12 months. Looking farther than that right now is always tough. As I joked earlier, we've actually already kind of outperformed what was in this 3 months ago. So I don't want to plan too much more than 12 months, but that's what we're focused on at least, through Q1 of next year.
Fantastic. You mentioned a decade out. What is that North Star?
North Star for us is becoming the singular trusted guide for consumers and employers across all insurance, wealth, and health needs. And so if you think about what Gyde can become, that guiding light is going to be consistent both now and in the future.
Very exciting. Fantastic. So Will, as we're wrapping up, what advice would you have for other entrepreneurs out there raising rounds, launching companies, building in the AI era?
Yeah, great question. I think first, get into an organization that gives you the opportunity to get some deep exposure in critical parts of the business. One of my first bosses at Oscar, who I still in many ways feel like I owe my career to, talked about find places where you can lead without explicit authority and just get your hands dirty and go build something within an organization that is talent dense, attacking a big problem, and is highly mission oriented. I encourage anybody that wants to be a founder to become a part of the future kind of Gyde mafia that, will ultimately exist. I say that internally every once in a while. But then I think the second piece, when you've made the call that you really want to be a founder, make sure that you don't look at it as a job. because it is not necessarily a job. I mean, I think in many ways, these things are equal parts calling and fiduciary responsibility once you get into it. So I'd encourage, anybody that's really thinking about, the entrepreneurial itch, scratching that, to be very thoughtful about the problem they're tackling, because they're going to be in it for a decade. And then I think the final piece is, like, you got to find the right partners. That's team members, co-founders, investors. These things are never accomplished alone and can't really reinforce the importance of having the right infrastructure around any founder that goes off and does this. There's no easy days, and that's kind of part of it. So you want to make sure that you've got the right infrastructure around you and are tackling a problem that you're deeply passionate about, with an opportunity that's large enough to get everybody around the table excited.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, you've got probably a million viewers out there, a lot of potential recruits, brokers, others. What else would you like to share with them?
Well, I think for wrapping up, I guess in conclusion, I would just say I don't know of many other companies that both have the ability on a missionary basis to have the impact for consumers, employers, employees that Gyde ultimately will, and build on the technical side what I call frontier AI tooling, but for communities that deeply need that tech. It's difficult to get those two at the same time, particularly when you underpin that with the foundation of a large commercial opportunity that I would call ever expanding on a TAM basis. So when you combine all three of those factors, tough to find a better place to go build something incredible than Gyde, and we look forward to doing it with Lightspeed and you, Brenton.
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Thanks, Brenton.
Thanks, my friend.